Let me try. Oh, it says please request record permission from the meeting host.
And I just solved my problem here, and I have I think we're
Yeah, it's recording now.
Very good, very good. Okay, so for those of you that are watching this recording, we had just done an introduction, and then Ron had just in time remembered to hit that record button. So you didn't miss much if you're watching this recording, but we were just kind of along the lines of saying what we'll do, we'll record these sessions, and so for some of you that occasionally have to miss a session, we'll archive that recording and let you know when it's posted on this page that you have there. And we're going to have create kind of a form where if you need to make up a class, for those of you doing it for license renewal, you can kind of send us a reflection saying, I watched the video and here's some things I took away from that. So we'll have a way to do that as we go through the year. Also at the top of the page here, the syllabus for the class, I think most of you probably saw that when you registered, and we can get that full syllabus linked up here as well. But I have just a little rubric here, which was kind of really a cut to the chase, kind of a brief version of the requirements that for people that are going to be participating for license renewal. And by the way, even for those that are not, we totally welcome you, to fully be involved in the class. We're also inviting just kind of the masses, from our special education listserv and our coordinator listserv. We're going to send out a notice, a few days before each future session, just saying you're welcome to come anytime you would like. As far as there might be some folks that are maybe not pursuing the full credit option, but they might say, hey, that topic is a good one in January. I'd like to come to that one. And people are more than welcome to do that as well. So, but as far as formally doing this as a course, you can see what I've got up on screen here for license renewal. A couple of things, participating we have 9 online classes scheduled between now and April. And so participation is a requirement for that, for the course credit. But we are going to make up, through recording, we're gonna make it work. And so people that have to miss an occasional section or session can make that up. So that's there. Also, you can see up here at the top of the rubric talks about some AAPD online modules. Okay, when we were planning the course, we wanted that credit opportunity to be there, and so we landed on this approximately 3:30 to 4:45 time frame. But then we were looking at some additional time to get us to that 15 hours for license renewal. And so for those doing the course for credit, there are some AAPD online modules that are fairly new that focus on specially designed instruction. So this SDI model that's out there in the state that many schools are working on, some even through the state grant, this big grant. There are 4 modules that deal with the overview of the SDI model, diagnosis, design, and delivery. And so to get us to that 15-hour mark, those of you that are doing the course for credit, we'd also have you do those modules, and we equated that to roughly 4 hours of online coursework. So and what we'll do as we get closer to a day when we're going to kind of tackle that topic, we'll inform everybody that's registered. Now would be a good time for you to do some of those online modules. Maybe prior to the discussion when we meet together on Zoom. Okay, so and of course those are modules that are available out there, free for anybody to do. So many others might want to work through those as well, but we'll ask the people doing it for credit to make sure that they accomplish those modules sometime throughout the year. And then again for credit, we just we'd be talking about something like this coming into us by the end of the year, sometime, by that last April date. Just an activity where we'd have you use the word score 2 IEPs against a quality compliance checklist that will make sure that you have and just kind of do a brief reflection, just kind of a self-reflection of when you look at a couple of your IEPs, or some of you that are maybe in different roles, could be someone else's IEPs that maybe you're collaborating with. And so number one, or the first bullet, looking at, did all those requirements, were they there? But also the second bullet, just have you reflect a little bit about how SDI was delivered, how you were able to use your progress monitoring data throughout the year to make instructional decisions. And a number of our topics throughout the year are kind of getting into that. Sometimes with our brand new teachers, when we have IEP training, sometimes we feel like IEP training becomes all about the compliance and how do we get these papers filled out, and those are all important things that need to happen. But we're thinking for you folks, just some of those really meaningful things on how did I really use my IEP, how did I use data to see how my students were doing, and how did they do, how did they progress on their goals, and having you reflect on some of those kinds of things. Okay, so that's yeah, so that's just kind of a short version of the course requirements per se that we put there on the page. And how about if I just pause there for a minute? Just does anybody, any questions out there specifically on that, as far as how the course will work or things like that? And by the way, everybody, I set everybody to mute on their microphones, so that's just to avoid echoing and things like that if people have their mics on. But anytime you want to participate, and we absolutely, this will be a lot more meaningful if you guys are participating and asking questions and sharing things. You just need to hit your microphone button and unmute it, and that gives you a chance to jump in. So any questions or thoughts on what I just talked about, those course requirements?
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, I've never used this system before, so I'm trying it out.
You're doing great. So, okay. So you were just testing there. Got it.
Just testing.
You're good. You're good. So then I'll just you can, or I can on my end. I can just hit the mute button, and that kind of, so when you're not talking, if we turn you off, that avoids sometimes if a bunch of people have their mics on, we get this ear shattering echoing going on. And so just anytime you need to chime in, hit that button and you'll be good to go.
Okay.
Perfect. So any questions about that, or? Okay. All right. So okay, well, let's move on then. Again, one more reminder. I had mentioned this as people were kind of jumping in and appearing here. This landing page that you use to log on today, this is where we're going to kind of this is where we'll archive the videos. It's where we'll put links like we have today for some materials that kind of go along with what we're covering for that day. And there'll be this sign-in sheet. There's this link where you can sign in, and so just one last reminder: if you're here today, just please click on that, and it's just a Google Doc where you can add your name as being here today. So, okay, so we're gonna walk through some material today on a particular focus topic, and you can see there our focus topic today kind of is around child find, and some changes in conceptions in Iowa, and some implications from the AW case, which is a legal case that came up in Iowa within Heartland AA actually. It's something that the state navigated through last year, and we continue to navigate through, and there were some significant implications and some cautions on how we do child find and identify kids for special education in Iowa. And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit today, kind of within the context of child find. So I'm going to take us through a few topics, starting with information about the AW case, and then jumping into, if you look at some of the links that are on the page here, you see a state procedures manual, number one. Most of you know that that's that monster document that hopefully you have downloaded to your computer for easier access. That's a 600-page monster that is kind of has been revised at least annually, and below that where it says 2018 release notes, that came out in July, and that's the document that kind of tells us in a little bit of a briefer format what has changed. What are some new things that kind of highlights from the procedures manual. We're going to be looking at some things in there specifically related to child find in the AW case. And then there's some other documents there as well. But I thought what would be, if I could direct everybody's attention, that last link that says order of relief from the AW case is a lengthy, I'm going to click on that. It's a lengthy document. You can see it's really the review of this this due process proceeding that happened in Iowa, it's lengthy. It's 70 pages. How about that? So don't worry. I'm not going to ask you to sit here and read 70 pages. However, before we start talking about this case and the implications for Iowa, I would like, so if you would all click on that and you can access that, I would like you, I'm going to ask you to kind of scan a little bit of information, and we'll probably take no more than 5 minutes to do that. But if I could ask you to go there, and then I would like you to go to page 19, which I have up on the screen now. So go to page 19, and you can see right there it says AW, and it starts, AW was born in 2003, she's now 13, and what that does for a number of pages here is it gives you kind of in gory detail a description of what happened with this AW case. And what we're talking about is a case where a student was referred for suspected disability multiple times. There were lots of complications, including periods of time where the student was homeschooled, and there were periods of time where parents were providing tutoring services for the child, and there were multiple evaluations that happened through the school, through the AEA, that resulted initially in the child not becoming eligible. And parents persisted. There were multiple outside evaluations, and all these implications that led to what we're going to talk about today. So there's lots of information, but I'm just going to ask you, kind of starting on page 19, to really scan in 5 minutes subsequent pages and just get a overview about what happened here, because it's going to, as you scan that, it's going to tell you what the evaluations were that occurred, what they looked like, and so forth. So if you would, I'm going to literally pause for about 5 minutes and have you just scan that information. Then we're going to talk about just an overview, what the findings were for this case. But just take 5 minutes to do that if you would. I'm going to just pause and stop talking for a minute. So again, I have the one page up on sharing on the screen here, but you're going to want to go to your own page so that you can page through it as needed. Just give you about a minute more. Just to, again, we're just kind of scanning and getting this overall sense of what happened, what was going on with this AW case. All right. Just to kind of get you guys involved, and so that it's not just myself or someone just talking. As you scan that, we are going to do kind of a walkthrough of big picture of this case and some of the consequences for how we're looking at child fine. But and this is something you can just call out. What were some of the things that maybe you noticed that in scanning this, you might be thinking, I'm glad that wasn't me as a teacher, the person involved. That sounds like a pretty complex case. But what were some of the significant events that happened that made this kind of a complex evaluation kind of a process? Anybody just to toss out, what are some of the things that happened that caused some contention here and some disagreement about whether or not, so the big question being, parents think AW should be eligible for special education. AA in school at different times were saying we don't think they are. So what were some of the events that were kind of unusual there? Just to kind of throw out.
Well, I can start. It looks like the student was making some nice progress in many areas through that intervention.
You bet. Yeah. So that idea that at different times, that idea that, gee, we did intervention and they're progressing, so maybe they don't have a disability. So that question came up. Absolutely.
I'm kind of wondering if the parent came in with a psychologist's note and a request for an evaluation, why didn't the evaluation process start sooner? Usually when a parent makes a request, you start some sort of process. Yes, you can do an intervention in the classroom, but you also start the evaluation process questions.
Yes, you bet. Yeah, so very, definitely that kind of thing was definitely part of the picture. There were just many details that made this somewhat contentious. Absolutely. So that raises that question of, when do we suspect a disability? When do we initiate that process and so forth? And yeah, other things that people saw just through a quick scan there.
The other part is Ms. Philbin concluded that she was developmental dyslexia at a moderate classical level, as well as mixed receptive and expressive language disorder and expressive language disorder.
Yeah.
And
yeah, thank you.
A couple other ones.
Yes. You might have seen that in there. And so then kind of framing that issue, we had, so on one hand, we had multiple AA and / school evaluations, but we also had multiple outside evaluations, didn't we, going on? And so one you might have, as you were looking in there, you might have seen one was actually involving, it was a speech language pathologist actually that did a comprehensive outside evaluation looking into literacy and language and came up with some of those diagnoses that you mentioned. So then we kind of have this issue of perhaps a medical model of disability, maybe kind of conflicting a little bit with an educational model where we're, in Iowa, where we tend to be a non-categorical state. And so you have that. So you have someone saying, based on on one hand, the AA school is saying, we don't know if we see evidence of disability, but you have a more medical model saying, I think we do, and I think it's called dyslexia. So yes, that was definitely a big part of the issue. But other things that maybe you saw in there. Did you catch the parts about homeschooling? Okay, that was that's one thing I might throw in right now for us to ponder. At different times, this student was homeschooled, so that brought in some different implications too. One of them being,
I was going to say the socialization side of it, the socialization ability to effectively communicate what she was and wasn't understanding once she got into the academic environment. So it may have been more of a communication deficit as opposed to the academic deficit.
Great point. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point, because as we develop this, we'll see that a big hang up was, kind of one side, if you will, saying we're not sure if AW is discrepant enough, and that, but you brought up this other issue, that a disability of a different type that might have been impacting AW. So absolutely, thank you.
Along with that homeschool part was things going back and forth, what they used for intervention at home, what programs they used, was it aligned with what she was really struggling with, getting that information to the teachers. Oh, yep, we sent that at the beginning of the year. Somebody didn't get it, got picked up. It was just kind of all over the place.
Yeah. So almost like the perfect storm. All these things kind of coming together to make it that much more complex. And maybe you caught this in there, but at one point, we know that in the evaluation process, there's this idea of exclusionary clauses. So, some of you that when you're involved, with your AA support staff, when you're doing these initial evaluations, these EERs, there's those questions that ask the evaluation team, do we think the problem is due to inadequate instruction, right? Inadequate core instruction, or is it really a disability? In the AW case, you would see in there that the parents at one point were actually challenged. I'll use that word, challenged, that, gee, maybe these problems we're seeing have to do with maybe instruction wasn't adequate or appropriate in the homeschool setting, and maybe it's that instead of being a disability. So, and you can imagine and picture how this just gets more and more contentious and controversial, eventually landing in a due process hearing that really had a significant impact on Iowa. So, any other things, just observations that you have, before we kind of?
I didn't see it in their scanning, but I'm wondering about the supervising teacher. What kind of log, if she keeps a log, or how often she checks up on them, things like that.
Oh, okay. So meaning when the homeschooling was going on? Yes. Got it. Yeah. Things like that tying into the instruction. But I believe that at some point when the school kind of raised that question of, did AW get the right instruction? I think family came back with kind of a bunch of evidence saying, yeah, we think so. And it really is an interesting case, because as you page through there, I can tell a lot of really good things happened in the school setting. I mean, you see lots of intervention going on with really, the Wilson Reading Program was used at different times. Other rewards programs, some of these research-based reading things were happening in schools. So lots of good intervention were happening. But then it kind of raised the question of, well, then are you actually providing what would be specially designed instruction now? And is that why maybe we're not, we're not, maybe you're not discrepant enough. So yeah, all these, it really is an interesting case. And so you've got a glimpse there of some of the details of how this thing played out, and you can certainly go back for your own reading pleasure and look there more. But let's it is pretty fascinating reading. But I want to take you to, let's just kind of walk through maybe the big picture of this. And there is, back on the landing page here, this where it says summary and resources. Just some presentation slides here that actually this is almost a year ago when these are some informational slides that we use with special education coordinators last fall, when this was all developing, and we were trying to figure out how we might respond. And so just wanted to, you've got that there as a resource, and but I wanted to kind of walk us through it, because it does a pretty nice job of kind of summarizing some of the big issues. So back then we said it's a work in progress, and I would say that's probably still accurate. But it was a March 2017 decision, actually, by a judge, and this all did happen in Urbandale with Heartland AA. And so the judge found in favor of the parents on 4 counts. And so you can see there, even on this first slide here, well, the first count impacts how we look at discrepancy, this idea of discrepancy when we do child find. The second one had to do with how we consider a child's progress in general education. The third was, there actually was reimbursement to parents for tutoring. So that money was paid, and then attorney fees were paid to parents as well. So let's just kind of navigate through. One issue was had to do with the eligibility criteria. And so what the judge basically said was that there was an illegal restriction of entitlement to special education. And so you can see some of the points there that have implications for how we proceed from here on out. But it was said that there was an omission of considering a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in several areas, both relative to intellectual development and this idea of a learning disability. So this all tied into kind of some of the dyslexia types of discussions. Basically, this finding is saying that you should have looked at more data, more comprehensive, looking at a pattern of strengths and weaknesses versus just focusing on discrepancy. Because if you read between the lines of AW, it did get into things such as my words, but you're not low enough. Gee, when we look at a standardized test, looks like you're not that low, so you must not be a child with a disability. This next one, failing to give good faith consideration to a clinical diagnosis, which had been brought up there, by more medical model folks. And ultimately, that's not saying anytime someone from the medical realm says do this, that schools must do it. But it was a reminder for us that we're supposed to consider those things. So when parents hand us a report from someone that says, my child has dyslexia, IEP teams and child find teams should consider that information. They shouldn't dismiss it. This third one was kind of the biggie, requiring a significant discrepancy from a norm reference kind of a test. And then that last one, and that's maybe a little bit hard to read there with the color, but narrowing the definition of special education and SDI so that it includes only those services that exceed the capacity of general education. And that was a biggie because a lot of you would remember that previously on our educational evaluation report, the last thing that was kind of asked there was, do this child's needs exceed the capacity of general education? And we would almost look at that as a kind of a decision point for whether or not, if it exceeds that, then I guess this child is a child that has a disability. But AW also challenged that idea a little bit in that could not, if a child has certain needs that require certain interventions and instruction, special instruction, but it's all in a general ed, setting, could that still not be a disability? And could that still not be showing the need for special education? So that issue that gets into the setting a little bit was also part of the challenge. So quite involved there as well. And I'm gonna jump a little bit here. You would bear with me. What were the findings and the implications? And we heard this last year. Some things went into immediate implementation, but then other things kind of were changed in language this past July when our procedures were rewritten. So this first bullet, the Iowa Department of Education shall not require, and the AEA and district shall not employ criteria that make a disability contingent upon a significant or severe discrepancy. And that was a big change. It led to what you see down here that has been essentially taken out of our EER form, our evaluation form, where in the past it would say, is this a significant discrepancy? So if you delve into the Iowa special education procedures, or if you did in the past, the language it wasn't strong enough to say that you must have it talked about significant discrepancy, and it gave some examples such as the 12th percentile. I don't know if anybody remembers that in the past, that was a number that was suggested as a possible cut score for significant discrepancy. And sometimes, I think across the state, sometimes we would hang our hat on that and we would say, gee, I'm making up numbers here, but what if AW really falls at the 17th percentile? And being too making too much focus on that discrepancy piece. So that was challenged. And so we were, while discrepancy is still part of the evaluation process, making a decision solely on discrepancy is basically not allowable now. We're not to do that anymore. Again, I'm jumping here a little bit, but the second big finding had to do with this general education capacity. So implications for us, being careful not to employ a definition of special education that precludes a child from being identified merely because instruction is within the capacity of general education. So in the AW case, lots of things were happening, as I mentioned earlier, and you guys kind of glanced at, some very good interventions, like the rewards reading program, things like that happened, and they were done within the capacity of special education, but that was now challenged that, well, if AW needs that, doesn't that constitute special education itself that maybe you're already providing? We had that. And so those were the two big ones. So pardon me for jumping too much here, but I want to take you back to our main screen here. That was just sort of a brief. Those two things were implications of avoiding extreme focus on discrepancy, and not precluding the idea that something solely in general education, might constitute SDI. Angie, can you have any thoughts on like what else are you thinking of remembering? Big issues that came up last year, and we're going to jump right into some of the release notes and how Iowa actually put that in writing. But any thoughts you have as far as other big implications?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered the highlights. Obviously, folks have heard that magnitude of discrepancy where you talked about 12th percentile or so forth. We can't really use those anymore. And from a school psychologist perspective who's been around for a long time, I used to do an IQ test and, would get 100. And if the teacher got, 18 points less in a reading assessment, they qualified for LD. So it is kind of hard to think about, well, if you can't talk about a discrepancy, I mean, how can anybody qualify for special ed? And, how are other states going to be handling this? So that whole idea of discrepancy meaning something different now is kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes. And the other piece I think that I struggled with as well as others is that capacity of general education. And you talked about it nicely, but just, from my perspective, if the student needs this intervention to be successful, it could mean, and general education is doing it, but he needs that could mean the student has a disability if that's what he needs to be successful. Even though it's being done in general ed, it could be that it needs to be identified as specially designed instruction. So those were the two things that really make it confusing. I know some AEAs have really done a lot of training, particularly Heartland, with that, what did you call it? The strengths and not weaknesses.
Pattern of strengths and weaknesses, yes.
Pattern of strengths and weaknesses, and they've really kind of glommed onto that language. And, we've chosen not to do that, at least to this point. But I think it will, as we continue down this path, change the way we look at entitlement and, just the way we look at some of those things. But those were a couple of key takeaways from me, that magnitude of discrepancy and the capacity of general education no longer necessarily being things that will prohibit a child from being identified.
Yeah. Thanks, Angie. So again, when you think of, for those of you that are often or even periodically involved in child find and initial evaluations, we still have, the EER is, on paper, it's mostly the same. We still have progress, discrepancy, and need. However, how we come to our decisions, the progress section is still, that's our RTI, our MTSS aspect where we're still documenting this test of sorts where we're applying an intervention, we're progress monitoring, we're looking at that student's response to intervention, as a one way of looking at, is this a child with a disability? But that with AW, there were some challenges in that arena too, because in AW's case, as I mentioned, there were some what appeared to be very fine interventions that happened, and some evidence that AW was progressing pretty well, but then that kind of reversed in that then the challenge was, well, is what you're providing AW, is that actually special education, and then shouldn't that really be on an IEP? So we had that challenge. And then on the progress section, we're not told, or we're not believing that we don't use the word discrepant at all. That's still part of the evaluation process. That's still a header on the report, but that magnitude of discrepancy, we're de-emphasizing that a little bit. So you'll still see in these evaluation reports, what is the child's level in reading, for example, what is the standard of comparison, but what we want to be cautious of is not, focusing exclusively on that and saying, this one number is not discrepant enough, and therefore we're not going to make the student eligible. So, but as Angie was saying, it just, the struggle is, some people being concerned of, can all kids then be eligible? But I think it's just a lot of good discussion for the teams to be able to make those good decisions. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The piece I can't wrap my head around is then that next step further. So let's say you know we have a student who requires MTSS support to be successful. Okay, so if that's considered specially designed instruction and therefore they need an IEP, does that now mean what's happening in the general education setting isn't good enough and now they have to have SDI with a special education teacher? If they're on an IEP now?
If they are on an IEP, and I know there's lots of thinking. If they are on an IEP, then I guess thinking about the context of AW, there's this idea that yes, maybe what the special instruction that student needs could be in the context of general education, but then if that student then goes on the IEP, if we have the conception that they need specially designed instruction, to me, then it becomes this idea that a special education teacher is the person designing and leading that.
Even though what was happening in general education through MTSS was quote unquote good enough, but they needed it, they need that support and it was good enough, but since they've qualified, now it isn't good enough. See where I'm going with this?
Well,
I don't think they're saying that it's not good enough. I think they're saying that's what they need. Hopefully they're making some success with that. Otherwise that's not what you would be doing. And as Ron said, it could be that that's what they get. Only now it's considered specially designed instruction and there's some special ed accountability with that. There's possibly more rigorous progress monitoring. There's collaboration between the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher. There's some of that potential design that could be changed a little bit with that special ed support. I think what I've heard from Thomas Mays and from our attorney is it could be that the gen ed teacher continues with that intervention under the guidance and support of the special ed teacher. But it could look very, very similar because that's what the student needs. It doesn't mean now that child is pulled out of that intervention that's successful, comes to the special ed room, and they have to get something different in the special ed room. Ron, I think that's what I've heard multiple people say now. So, and I'll just be very honest with you. Sometimes people don't refer to special education because they think something's working and they know that the special ed teacher has, 20 kids and they're working with 4 different grade levels and, they have to know 4 different core curriculums and yada, yada, yada. So maybe they don't refer a kiddo because they know this is working. And this allows for that identification because they are special education. They are entitled and have that need. But that support doesn't have to be within the context of the special ed setting.
If I could, can you hear me, Ron?
Yes, we can hear you, Terry. Yep.
If I could add to that, I totally agree with what Angie was saying. And I think I'm pleased to see this myself. I think it looks more at the whole child. I think we're looking at strengths and weaknesses. We're looking at the big picture. And I think if we're writing IEPs the way that we should, personalized to that individual child, like she said, it doesn't mean we're pulling them into a special ed room to give specially designed instruction. It can happen in the general ed room. And I think the nice thing about it is I'm hoping that it will create more collaboration And I also think there is going to be more accountability, which for me is a win-win when I think about this.
I think it's not just the accountability, which I agree that that's there, but so often I feel like, and I could be completely wrong, so if I'm all wet, let me know, but I feel like special education teachers are just this entity off to the side. They're the ones that are responsible for looking at the student progress data. They don't necessarily have a team of people supporting that process, maybe the SPED rep. But if you think about general ed and there's a building leadership team and they're looking at FAST data and they're making decisions about sorting kids according, in flexible groups, you're kind of a team of one and sometimes two when your special ed rep can be there and support you. But it allows for better collaboration, as you said, on let's look at the data, let's make sure that it's working. If it's not, how can we collectively talk about what do we need to do differently, to add some intensity, some frequency, that kind of thing. So I think it helps in a number of ways, but getting that group think also, that collaboration is key, I think, with that. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, there's been many years that I felt like I'm an island unto myself. So I think it's a very good thing. And I think too is, there's some concerns. Will it open the floodgates, for special ed, population and workload? There's some negatives too that you have to think about. But yeah, I agree.
And I don't know that it's going to open the floodgates. I mean, I don't think we necessarily saw that. There's going to be a few cases, but we always have that door open for disability suspect. That casts a wide net, as people say, and so it's just looking at things a little bit differently. But I don't think I don't think it's opened up a can of worms. I mean, I think we're doing okay. We're identifying 99.9% of the time those kids that really have a disability and need specially designed instruction.
Yeah, great. You can see I have something pulled up here. One thing I wanted to kind of have us walk through just a little bit here. What I've got is the release notes up here. This is what I mentioned. This kind of a section saying what has changed in the state procedures. There's a good chunk of that had to do with implications of AW. But this one down here where it says when is specially designed instruction needed is revised in light of AW. So I thought that would be good for us to look at. Bear with me. Start up here. So I guess one thing that kind of came to be was this idea that kind of a reminder that a crux of, if you have a disability or if you need an IEP under IDEA, by definition, you require specially designed instruction. That's the whole reason why you're going to go on an IEP under IDEA. So there was some language here. You can kind of see that. The eligibility decision requires the team determine which of the child's identified needs, if any, require specially designed instruction. And that definition that you're probably familiar with, that what that means is adapting as appropriate to the needs of the eligible child, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. So that's what SDI means. And we've always known that can be in different settings. It can be in a general ed setting or a special ed setting, but I think AW kind of even reminds us, that general ed setting might be the location where that's going to be needed sometimes. And you can see in yellow there, teams must consider all disability-related needs, all, in determining if the specially designed instruction is needed. And we kind of have some guiding questions here to kind of help us think about that. And so I think the emphasis on that yellow part there, that all, again, is kind of as opposed to we need SDI if our reading score is below the 12th percentile. right? See, that's very different than there may be some complex reasons why a child needs specially designed instruction, even though that score might be a little bit higher. So that gets into this whole idea of dyslexia, and even advocacy groups that work with dyslexia all played into this case as well. So yeah, there's some language in here that kind of dealt with that, and this part as well. This is very, very important. Guidance for children who have a disability but do not require specially designed instruction. So what's that? Are there students out there that have a disability but don't require specially designed instruction? Well, I know one example that's being talked about a little in the state right now is, what about in these release notes, you'll see some information too that kind of deals with students with maybe that need vision and hearing supports. What if your student has a hearing impairment and maybe they need amplification? Do they have a disability? They absolutely do. They have a medically confirmed hearing loss. But what if they don't need specially designed instruction? That kind of makes us think again, well, that student may not be on an IEP if they don't need SDI. They would be protected and covered under Section 504 in those ways. But some of the language is kind of reminding us, that the whole crux of the focus of what is special education, it means that student needs special designed instruction. That's really important. So there's just some rewritten guidance in the procedures that kind of help us think through this. And so I thought these would be helpful. What I've got up on the screen here now, examples and non-examples. And so this first one that you're looking at on the screen right now, this example of a hearing student, or a student with a hearing loss. So in the example, you've got a child who maybe needs the, some of you are familiar with itinerant teachers of hearing and deaf and hard of hearing. Those are AA staff that are teachers, and they serve kids out in the districts. So an example of an eligible individual, that student with hearing loss needs special instruction, maybe to work on communication and literacy or even advocacy and things like that. So they need that instruction. But a non-example might be a child with a disability who maybe they need amplification, maybe they need hearing aids, things like that, but they don't require SDI. And then you can see the other examples down here as well. Maybe a child has a disability and requires assistive tech and specially designed instruction, but what if they only require assistive tech? That would be a non-example. So it's just there's kind of some fairly repetitive things here, but it's pointing out that this big idea that if you don't need SDI, you're really not going to be a student on an IEP. So that's been revised a little bit here too. And even this example here, a child who has a disability and requires physical and occupational therapy services. That would be like direct services to enhance motor functioning. And maybe they need special transportation. What if that's a wheelchair lift, things like that. But if there's a child who has a disability and requires transportation only and not SDI, that student in this viewpoint would not be on an IEP. So you can see some of those examples in there. And so a little bit of this conception of this idea of SDI being the crux of special education kind of was refocused a little bit through some of these AW discussions. So really has been a really pretty big impact on how we're thinking about some of these things. Anybody have any thoughts and questions about that? Just these things that I just kind of showed you here as far as refocusing on SDI.
I will say, Ron, we have about 7 minutes. I'm the official timekeeper, so.
You bet.
All right.
Any thoughts or questions as we get close to wrapping up here? Okay. So, and let's see, one last thing I was going to, bear with me. Reevaluations. We wanted to, there were some changes in the format of how we do reevaluations. Let me quickly find that if I can. There we go. And I would say this isn't these changes. So this is what you're looking at here is a mock-up of the R page on the IEP. It is different now when we do reevaluations. I would say that this isn't 100% due to the AW case, but part of it was. And so the questions have changed, and you can kind of see what those look like. Question 1, what evidence is there that the child continues to be an eligible individual or does not continue to be eligible? So a narrative there. But so that still gives us the opportunity for a narrative to summarize data on eligibility. And that really is, of course, that's the big question. When we do reevals, at least every 3 years, does this child continue to be eligible? But then you have these checkbox formats for eligibility decisions. They continue to be eligible because, or they're no longer eligible because. And if you look at the descriptions here, again, it kind of gets into this SDI, or it does get. So one option is, for a student that continues to be eligible, you can see that they're not meeting the standards applicable for all children in the areas of concern, and they require specially designed instruction to progress towards those. Or maybe they're meeting the standards applicable to all children, but they need specially designed instruction to sustain or improve that progress. So that could have, that second checkbox, that could be an AW kind of a kid. Maybe we do see some good progress, but we might say that, but to continue that or to sustain or to improve that, we need specially designed instruction to continue. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that reevaluation page has changed a little bit to focus on those questions a little bit differently. And then some of the questions, will look very similar. That same one at the end there, one when we consider exiting, is kind of unchanged as well. But so both for our initial evaluations when we write EERs and our reevaluations, we have seen some changes, and we wanted to kind of share that with you as our first topic in light of AW. Hey,
Ron, one question.
You bet.
Any significant changes to behavior IEPs?
There's I wouldn't say, there, when you look through those release notes, there's, there is some language that's been kind of sharpened up in there as far as how we do it, but as far as how we write behavior IEPs, not really, but some changes in language on, just getting into these issues of, when are we supposed to do a functional behavior assessment? When are we supposed to do a behavior plan? There are some language changes in there, and you can kind of see those in those release notes. But
okay,
I wouldn't say anything really
significant,
really huge or significant. But.
Okay, good, thanks.
All right, so we are about out of time here, and so we will wrap up. But just like pointing you to the landing page here. Let's see. So we have our next date. Sorry, I'm making that too big. October 10th. And so our focus topic for that day, we want to delve a little bit more into kind of these progress monitoring issues, just the topic of goal rating, progress monitoring, and instructional decision making. So just delving a little bit more into that idea of, how are we rating our goals, how are we collecting data, and how are we using that data to make maybe or to consider changes in how we are helping our students. So.
And I might suggest that if any of you have specific questions you would like answered, obviously that's a lot to cover in a 75-minute time frame. But if you have any specific questions you'd like us to consider talking about, go ahead and email Ron or I, and we can collaborate. And if we can't address it at that time, perhaps we can get you that information in a different way. So don't hesitate to let us know if you have any specific questions you'd like us to address that day.
Great, thanks, Angie. No, I think that's an awesome idea. I think that would really make it more meaningful. I mean, if we had, maybe some of you have some specific questions even about a type of goal, and we could have some discussion about that next time we meet. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I was trying to. Oh.
No, go ahead.
Hey, Ron, I have a quick question.
Sure.
It's Terry. Under the resources for today, there's a summary, of the slides that you showed. I was trying to access that, and it tells me I need permission. Is there any way you can let us see those? Because I wanted to further read it.
You bet, absolutely. So that 1, 2, 3, the fourth bullet down, this one? I
believe that was the one that was the slide presentation.
Yes. I will. Yeah. You bet. Now that was that. I'll check the settings. I may have a wrong setting on there. I'll make sure that's changed so anybody can access it. So you bet. Thanks for letting me know.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Ron, next week or next session, I can't start till 4. Would you prefer we come late or just watch the recorded one?
Well, that's a great question. No, we want to make this work and this be flexible.
Or both.
I think it would be important for you to hear the whole thing.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So if you're going to come in mid-time, then maybe just wait for the recording. But certainly, I think you can join in live if you'd like to.
Okay. Well, I'm just checking because our school day isn't over till 4. So most of the time I can't get here till then. So.
Yeah. You do what works for you. How about that?
Okay. Thanks again, folks, for being here. And we'll for those of you that are registered and officially in the system, we'll keep doing some communication through our through email and with some reminders and things like that, and we'll go from there. So have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.